In the lead up to the French Revolution, the Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, was famously thought to have said, when told by one of her advisors that the people lacked any bread, to let them eat cake. While this statement may not have necessarily been said by Marie Antoinette in reality, the sentiment reflects many other people's ideas towards hunger in general. In West Africa, floods made worse by global warming, or caused by global warming, have destroyed much of West Africa's food supply. Most West African countries, particularly Nigeria and also Ghana and Liberia, have been hit very heavily by these floods. This all then begs the question then, with floods destroying massive amounts of agriculture in West Africa, will West African floods have a sizable impact on global food prices? And the answer is yes, because number one, food security is heavily affected by the destroying of the crops. Number two, food has already been short supply since the war in Ukraine began. And three, because of historical precedents set by other floods in the region. First, food security is already heavily affected by the destroying of these crops. According to NYU on October 17, 2022, new research found that flooding can affect food security for over 5.6 million people living in West Africa across several nations. Of these 5.6 million, about 12% experienced food insecurity in the studied areas About 12% of all of those who had experienced food insecurity in Africa had been affected by flooding from between 2009 to 2020. This shows that floods in Africa have had a significant impact on food security for the people. And for all of human history, floods have been the deciding factor in who gets food. So, in the modern world, with climate change becoming an ever bigger problem, these floods destroying agriculture and becoming worse as a result have been tremendously impactful in the food security and the availability of food for millions of people across Africa. Additionally, according to PBS on October 22, 2022, experts fear that the damaged farmlands will further increase food prices at a time in which inflation rates are already at record highs, for example, in Nigeria and Ghana at 20.7% and 37% respectively. This shows that, combined with the current economic crisis, the rise in the cost of food will further drive inflation, and food prices have no choice but to go up when so much of the supply has been destroyed by these crops. Secondly, because of the war in Ukraine, food has already been short. According to AP News on October 22nd, 2022, long before the floods and Ukraine's war with Russia, West Africa was already facing its worst flood crisis in 10 years, with more than 27 million people hungry, according to a report released by international aid organizations in April. What this shows is that, compounded with previous existing factors, and both older and more recent, such as the war in Ukraine and already happening floods that had been in a pattern for 10 years at this point, food security in West Africa has hit an all-time low and will continue to get worse as time goes on. This also shows that the lack of availability for food is continuing in a trend that has existed for some time now and will continue to exist because of these new floods. Lastly, because of historical precedent, we can conclude that these food prices will in fact go up, because according to The Guardian on January 24th, 2020, during this time, East Africa was also devastated by a series of similar floods in 2020, and during these floods, regional prices for maize, for example, went up by 41% and beans went up by 25%. Floods in Somalia during 2020 emptied the breadbasket for virtually the entire region and almost everyone living in East Africa. It is very safe to conclude then that being in the same continent, these floods in West Africa will do much of the same for many agricultural nations in the region, specifically because of the fact that many other countries depend on Nigeria and Ghana for their grain exports. And so with these crops being destroyed, prices will have no choice but to go up. And as a whole, countries dependent on West African agriculture will be very severely crippled when it comes to their food availability and when it comes to food affordability in the coming few months. Thus, for these three reasons, the answer to the question of will West Africa's floods significantly impact global food prices? The answer is yes. Thank you.